My name is Sean Levine, and I'm in the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Texas A&M Central Texas. Collaborative therapy is a unique relationship between therapist and client. It kind of bases its whole system off of a postmodern epistemology, as well as a social constructionist view of how meaning is created in relationships. And so the idea is to create this unique relationship through dialogue that generates meaning on behalf of the client. In this particular mode of doing therapy, the client is always the expert in their particular life, their story, their world. So the idea is to continually inspire a dialogue with the therapist and the client that allows these meanings to kind of come forth as the client explores his or her world, and also perhaps the problems and issues that are presently giving them trouble. So it's a broad discussion, not just about the problem, but also about the other aspects of life that might come into play to give meaning and context to that problem, and then help the therapist and the client find their way to a new way of talking about it that reduces the problematic elements and allows wellness to kind of come forth. I think the main thrust of this is how language and worldview interact in a person's life to create meaning. And the goal of collaborative therapy is for the therapist and the client to work together to collaborate around the client's life and experience to find these meanings. A big threat to this mode of therapy is what we call a monologue. So when either client or therapist engages in an activity where we're trying to sell an idea to one another, either the client to the therapist or the therapist to the client, then a monologue develops, and this kind of therapeutic impasse emerges where there's no more generation of useful ideas, meanings, or understandings. And in that particular context, the collaborative nature of the therapy has collapsed in on itself, and now it's just a monological discussion that isn't really helping either the client or the therapist to find new ways of understanding the client's situation. So that's kind of the essence, I think, of collaborative therapy. The aim is at a unique dialogical process that allows client and therapist to explore life together, ask questions, and to mutually puzzle over what it is that's causing the client to find difficulty in life at that moment. I think probably one of the most important misconceptions about collaborative therapy is this: in that it doesn't use a scripted set of techniques. It's very likely that some people might think that collaborative therapy is just kind of a whimsical experience and doesn't really have direction, focus, or clear goals. And so because of the fact that there are not particular techniques under this umbrella of collaborative therapy, people might think that it just doesn't have a focus. And I think to refute that, one would just argue it's very complicated and complex to maintain a collaborative conversation that doesn't rely on technique, but rather focuses entirely on the relationship between the client and the therapist. I kind of liken that to surfing. You're always kind of riding this very close edge that could teeter off into monologue and unhelpful conversation at any point. So it's rather complex and complicated, but because of the fact that it doesn't have these scripted techniques like so many other therapeutic models, I think the misconception is it doesn't have focus, direction, or a clear goal. I really enjoy the collaborative approach to family therapy and therapy in general because I think that it really honors the person that I'm dealing with. The idea is to really focus on them, and going one step further from the kind of humanist therapies of early family therapy years. Collaborative therapy really says that the client is the expert in their life. And as a therapist, I'm gifted to sit with people and hear their stories, interact with their lives, and really get to know them because without that, this whole thing falls apart. And so I'm able to really focus in on people's lives, share in their journey, and collaborate with them to build a meaning for them. So I like the focus, the real clear focus on the client. I like the fact that not having particular scripted techniques forces me to really listen to the people I'm dealing with. If I don't understand the way that they use language, if I don't get a chance to really engage in their worldview and understand where they're coming from, then I simply can't really help them. I can't do anything significant. That dialogue we were talking about earlier just won't happen. So I really have to listen and really engage in their world, the way that they use language, and it forces me to get to know people at a very deep and authentic level. So I'm drawn to collaborative therapy because it puts the client in the driver's seat, so to speak. Their language, their life, their problems, their victories, those things kind of really drive the whole process, and I get to engage that at a very deep and profound level. I like the challenge of not allowing the dialogue to devolve into a monologue, where I'm just telling the client what to do, or they're just telling me about all of their woes. The challenge of maintaining a dialogue in all of that, and not allowing a duel of realities to take place, where we're kind of wrestling back and forth between what's real and what's true, that leads to that therapeutic impasse. The challenge of maintaining the dialogue and of being very authentic with people and giving them a space to be very authentic with me, I think really draws me to the whole project of collaborative therapy. Recently I worked with a young lady who had experienced a significant loss in her life. And there was all the signs of loss and grief, depression and other things. Lots of things we could have gotten stuck on in terms of quote-unquote problems. And what we did instead, we explored her grief, we explored all of her feelings, we moved kind of like channels through different aspects of her experience. And because the collaborative approach focuses so much on dialogue, we really did exchange back and forth, moving around the world of her grief and loss. I think we could have gotten easily sidetracked by a number of different symptomologies or symptoms, things that she was personally experiencing, but instead we were able to stay above all of that, keep it in the context of our dialogue, but not get focused or stuck on that. And as we moved around, so to speak, as we kind of walked around her grief, we were able to see a number of different things that were causing her to feel bad, and recognize that all of those things were valid and important experiences. And so just in dialoguing back and forth, in me asking her questions that kind of invited her to experience her grief more deeply, we were able to move kind of through it and come to the other end with a different way of looking at it. Her grief and the different symptoms that were a part of that became, in a sense, friends of hers on her journey. And she was able to envision letting them find their place in her life. And I think the ongoing dialogue that we had about her grief helped her to talk to herself about it in a way that allowed her to move on from therapy and no longer need my assistance, because she could dialogue with herself about those issues and concerns as they came up. And so I think the process that we went through helped to kind of allow her to really look at what she was dealing with in a new way, and then walk away with a different perspective. I think the main idea of collaborative therapy is to keep the dialogue going. So if I had to describe it in one sentence, I think keep the dialogue going is a way of really engaging the unique mode that collaborative therapy is. And so it focuses on the process, keep it going. That's the ongoing process. And then the process that's important is the dialogue. And so keep the dialogue going, I think, is a way of capturing collaborative therapy in one sentence.